welcome. We are going to go over chapter 2. This is going to go kind of quickly because it's such a big chapter and we only have 15 minutes to make these videos. First of all, we're going to look at the word critical or critical thinking. The word critical comes from the Greek word for critic, which means to question, to make sense of, or to be able to analyze. We are not doing this to tear others down, but rather to constructively criticize our own thinking, not someone else's. Socrates was probably the first really well-known critical thinker and philosopher. And if you've ever watched the TV show House, they use the Socratic method quite well. They just use a lot of questioning to try to arrive at answers. One of the things that you must be, if you are going to be a critical thinker, is open-minded. However, a lot of people think they're very open-minded when they're actually only open-minded to things that they believe. For instance, we can't be open-minded if we are calling other people closed-minded, because automatically we're closing our mind to their views and their thoughts and their information. So to be open-minded is not equated with progressive thinking or newer thinking. Open-minded means you listen to everyone's perspective and then evaluate. Critical thinkers, guys, are very knowledgeable. And so in other words, they really know what they know. They've gone out, they've researched, they've looked at both sides of everything. And they know what they know and can share it with you in a factual way. And if they don't know it, they have no problem admitting it. They may say, you know what, you brought up a totally different perspective on this. I didn't realize that. I'm going to have to go learn more about that. That is a critical thinker and something you don't see often. Mentally active. If you are knowledgeable, then you had to have been mentally active. And if you are quick to point out when you don't know something, you're going to remain mentally active because you take the initiative to go find out information. A lot of students start out the critical thinking course saying, well, I'm not very political, or I really don't get into stuff like that. And while we're not asking you to become angry and argumentative with others, not at all. You do have a responsibility as a critical thinker to start learning about issues and problems, to start mentally going after these and thinking about them. That is your responsibility as a thinking individual. If you do that, you automatically become curious. But remember, you're not just curious about your opinion or your side of the thing, but you are just as curious about why people think differently than you. You're also going to want to be an independent thinker. Critical thinkers are not afraid to disagree with the group opinion. Now, a lot of people think they're independent thinkers, but most people aren't. When we think about our political affiliation, if you always think that your political side is right, if you're Democrat and you always think that the Democrats are right, if you're Republican and you always think the Republicans are right, and you can't ever say, you know what, the other side has a good point, then you're probably not an independent thinker. If you cannot in any way, shape, or form think that the opposite political party from yours has good points, then you want to work on your independent thinking. They're skilled discussants. They are able to have discussions with people without them turning into arguments. Mainly because the point of their discussion is to learn more, not to tell everybody how right they are. They're very insightful. They're able to get to the heart of the problem. Others may get distracted by things, but critical thinkers, they've taken the time to listen and consider, and they become more insightful. They can see things that others don't see because they're always thinking. And they're also very self-aware. I love that baby. He's adorable. But maybe it's a different type of self-aware we're discussing. The self-awareness of, you know what, I know I hold some biases here. I know if I really love or really dislike the president, that is a bias of mine, and I'm not going to be able to fairly evaluate what I'm hearing about him because I'm either very, very for him or very, very against him. I need to know that I have a bias there and remove that bias so I can think critically. They're also very creative. That creativity actually naturally comes out of the critical thinker because their brain is so used to thinking in different ways. And they're also extremely passionate. Now, we're all passionate about certain things, but critical thinkers, they're passionate for understanding. If they're taking an interest in things and they are curious about those things, they are automatically going to become passionate. They're going to want to be passionate for more knowledge, for more understanding. They would literally burn with the need for more knowledge and more understanding. The cognitive abilities and attitudes that characterize critical thinkers, these are just some that the text says. They think actively. They carefully explore situations with questions. They think independently. They view situations from different perspectives. They support diverse perspectives, and they can be organized in their discussions. Well, guys, thinking actively or learning actively, very similar things. Like right now, you're kind of passively learning because you're just listening and taking in information. And while this is important because you do need an information gathering part of your learning and thinking, there is a point where you need to be prepared to discuss it and use what you learn. And of course, you do get the opportunity to do that in your classes because you have the discussion portions under your learning activities, and you also have the chance to use what you learn with all of the different activities and assignments that you have in your classroom. You also want to be able to carefully explore situations with questions. Factual questions are just simply gathering facts, the who, what, when, where. Interpretation is more of a learning more about it. Let's scoot to the next one. Interpretation is when you are organizing them, you're putting them in relationships, in categories, so to speak. Then you're going to analyze. Analyze kind of means you pull it apart and look at all the different parts. Here you look at the parts to put them in categories. Here you just pull out all the different parts to really understand it. Synthesizing is putting it back together, but in different ways. And you can do this with information. You would gather that information and you would categorize that information. You'd pull it all apart and look at it carefully and then put it back together to come to your own conclusion. Then you want to evaluate. Evaluating is questioning. It's kind of grading. It's just really saying, hey, let me make sure this is the truth. Let me judge this. That's evaluation. And applying is using it. Think of anything. Let's say that you are looking at the issue of abortion. So you would gather lots and lots of facts from both sides. And then you would say, let me categorize these. These are pro, these are con, these are in the middle. Then you would analyze them. You would pull them apart and carefully look at each of them. And you may be doing some evaluation as you're doing that. You may say, okay, these are really not these particular facts really don't fit here, or they're not working very well, or they came from poor sources, let me throw them out, so on and so forth. Then you would synthesize, put all that information together to come to your own conclusion. Once you come to your own conclusions, you would want to evaluate it. There's lots of different ways to evaluate or judge your conclusion. One way is to just give yourself a nice list of questions. Another way is to ask other people. Other people are much better at evaluating others than they are at evaluating themselves. And then you would say, hey, how can I apply this? If this is the conclusion I've come to, how can I apply it in this situation? Let me then apply it in this situation. Let me try it and then apply it in this situation. A lot of times this is the one that really gets us thinking like, I'm going to have to refine what I thought was my final answer, because as I try to apply it, it doesn't work everywhere. Thinking independently. We all want to be independent thinkers, but as we said before, most people really aren't. We think that we have looked at our reasoning and our evidence, but normally we've only looked at the reasoning and evidence that came to us easily. Maybe someone told us, or maybe we saw it on TV. True independent thinkers are going to say, let me go out and research both sides of this. I'm not just going to research what I agree with. I'm going to especially research what I disagree with so I can understand better before I come to my conclusion. I want to be an independent thinker. Different ways to evaluate your beliefs once you go out there and start researching. Who are the authorities? Are they true authorities? Are they trustworthy? References, when you pull out some resources, what are the credentials? Who are the people that put this together? Are there people that disagree with these guys when they say this? On what reasons or evidence do the authors base their opinions? We would never just use one. We would want to go out there and look for opposing research. Our factual evidence, guys, when you start looking at research, this is very important. How are things interpreted? Does the evidence really support the conclusion? It's really important to learn how to read research, to look at the methodology, to look at the way they collected data and who they used to create the data. All of that's very important. And then personal experience, of course, is very, very important. Viewing situations from different perspectives. That's one thing that a critical thinker must be able to do. If you look at this picture, it's kind of funny because you've got guys just looking at an elephant. This comes from an African proverb, and this guy, you can see they're all blindfolded. He thinks he's touching a wall. He thinks he's touching a rope, a tree. This person has a trunk. They think it's a snake. This guy has the tusk. It's a spear. This guy thinks it's a fan. And from their limited perspective, that's all they know. Critical thinkers admit that they have a very limited perspective. We only know what we know. We only experience what we experience. So critical thinkers are open to new ideas and different viewpoints, even if it's uncomfortable to listen to it. And then they are able to support those differing perspectives with reasons and evidence. Being able to view issues from different perspectives and support them with reason and evidence really enables you not only to understand other sides of an issue, but to understand why these views are held. Remember, the point of a critical thinker is not to say, this is why I'm right, but to really learn to understand why there's a debate in the first place. Critical thinkers are able to discuss ideas in an organized way. When they are discussing, they're not doing this. Instead, they're listening. When they give their reasoning, it's with evidence and fair reasons. They respond to the other person's points instead of just refuting them. And they're asking questions. That's a big thing. People rarely ask questions of someone who opposes them. And not questions to try to trap them, but questions so that you, the critical thinker, can learn more. And the point of their discussion is not to win the argument, but rather to have a better understanding of the whole issue. Reading critically, when you go to read information, think, what is the purpose of the selection and why did the author write it? That's probably the most important thing. Why did the author write it? What was their point when they wrote it? Because authors do some fancy things to words that we don't even realize that make things highly biased. Who is the intended audience? What is the subject of the selection, and how would you evaluate its cognizy and reliability? Who is the writer? What perspectives does she bring to the writing? He or she bring to the writing selection? And what is the larger context in which this selection appears? Is the writer responding to a particular event or participating in an ongoing debate? All these are very important to realize when you're reading. That article that's in front of you may have much more behind it than what you were just reading. So you want to start out by really thinking about that author. Why did they write it? What was their purpose? Who's funding them to write this? What are they getting out of this if they write it? Do they have a particular bias or perspective that they're writing from? Those things are terribly important to realize as critical thinkers while you read. When you analyze issues, guys, basically it boils down to this. What is the issue? Be prepared to define it. When you look at something like marijuana, that's a huge issue, and you have to really break it down. Are we going to talk about recreational marijuana? Are we going to talk about medical marijuana? So on and so forth. What is the evidence? Be careful where you pull your evidence. For instance, if we're talking about marijuana, we're not going to pull our evidence from the magazine High Times. What highly biased, right? You'd want to pull medical evidence, and that's factual data that comes from unbiased sources, which is kind of hard to find, those unbiased sources. What are the arguments? All of the arguments, not just the ones with which we agree. And then finally, what is the verdict? Once that you've looked at the issue, pulled all the evidence, looked at all of the arguments within that evidence, then you can come to a verdict. But remember, when you're doing this, you want to remove your bias before you begin anything. Class, I hope you enjoyed that. And please take some time to have a quick discussion or a long discussion about Chapter 2. It's a really great chapter, and I hope this is getting you moving on through your journey of becoming a critical thinker. Thanks, guys.